No, we move on to the next
I thought
question.
we was in Memphis. I apologize. We had the
This question is for Bob Corker, and it comes from Amanda Raffin.
Mr. Corker, do you believe the fence being built between the United States and Mexico is effective, and why or why not?
The fence being built.
Correct.
Okay.
Do you believe the fence being built between the United States and Mexico is effective? Why or why not?
Okay.
And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the question. I was down at mile 6 on the Mexico-Arizona border about 3 months ago. And it was amazing to look out into the desert and to see a pathway coming into America as far as you could see. And then to see this hole in the fence that any of us could easily duck down and walk through. And then to meet with people in Tombstone, Arizona, talk with people who used to be on the city council, to talk to ranchers and talk to others, to realize that there are people of all different kinds of nationalities from all over the world that are actually coming through that southern border. And so I do think we need to do everything we can to secure our southern borders. There's all kinds of technologies. I was in Israel about 14 months ago and looked at some of the technologies that they had there on the ground in order to secure their borders. And believe me, their border issues in many ways are far more difficult than the ones that we face on either side of our country. So I think what we need to do as it relates to our borders is absolutely ensure that we use technology, use those things necessary so that we know who's coming and going, because we absolutely do not know what their intentions are. There are a lot of other things, though, that need to occur around the issue of immigration. We need to absolutely make sure that we allow people to work here, but only if they're legal. And there's some circumstances that need to be changed around those quotas. I think that anybody who's here illegally should return and come back only through legal channels. And I think we need to have instant employer certification so that people know when they're hiring somebody whether they're legal or not. And I think that people who abuse that certainly should be punished. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ford, 1 minute for rebuttal.
There's a big difference between my opponent and I on this issue as well. I've never hired an illegal alien. He has. 4 of them. His site was raided, a work site of his was raided in my home city of Memphis after 2 visits by a federal law enforcement agency. I'm the only person on this stage who's ever voted for an anti-illegal immigration bill. Matter of fact, the strongest in the country. The strongest the country's ever seen. 2 reasons why we have to protect our borders. If you were a terrorist, the easiest way to get in this country today is to come across our northern or southern borders. 2, if you were trying to bring explosives or ammunition into this country, the easiest place to do it is the northern or southern border. We ought to adopt the 41 recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. The Republican House and the Republican Senate and our Republican President have failed us on this front. I believe it's time for a new direction and a change in Washington, one that will actually get the job done.
Okay, question number 4 is for Mr. Ford, and that is from Dan Dufty.
Representative Ford, in the history of the United States, the national debt has never been as large or grown as rapidly as it has in recent years. How would you combat this problem today to prevent leaving this burden on the future generations?
How old are you, young fella?
22?
You're 22 years old. Do you know that you owe the United States government $28,000?
No, sir.
Everybody in our great country, children, those of you who are about to have grandchildren, and those who are about to give birth, the newborn owes $28,000. For the last 6 years, under my opponent's party's leadership, the debt has grown by almost $2 trillion. And the people who will pay it will be you and I and everyone else. I have a couple simple answers to it. They're going to try to blame me. They call me a liberal. But I got to tell you, they're the ones who run up the debt. And if they wanted to control it, they could have by now. Number 1, we had to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Number 2, we ought to move to a 2-year budget cycle. Number 3, we ought to end all of this pork barrel spending that exists in Washington today. We ought to allow Medicare to negotiate directly with the drug companies. That would reduce by almost $1 trillion the spending that takes place in Washington today. And finally, we ought to say to all of those federal agencies, there's 16 of them, of the 23, that can't audit themselves, meaning they don't know where they're spending the money, how much they're spending it, or how fast it's leaving. We ought to give them a little ultimatum. If you can't figure out how to audit yourself, no more public tax dollars for that agency. This would give us a great start and reduce the challenge and the burden that you and I face as young Americans of paying off a debt that a bunch of people in the majority in Washington have created over the last 6 years. I'm on your side on this one.
Mr. Corker, 1 minute.
I'd like to remind everybody that the only person who's been in Washington over the last 10 years is Congressman Ford, and I have nothing whatsoever to do what's happened there, but I would like to share with you that over the last 5 years, Congressman Ford has tried to add $280 billion to your tab, by the way, adding money, not saving money. So his actions in Washington have been far different than what he says. He tends to stretch things a little bit. No one has ever worked for me that's been an illegal immigrant. 18 years ago, a subcontractor, one of thousands, a subcontractor had 4 employees that worked for them. The INS applauded me for what we did as a company to quickly end that. And as a matter of fact, I think my experiences in the private sector, none of which the congressman has, would be highly beneficial in dealing with those problems in Washington.
No applause, please. Okay, our next question is for Bob Corker, and that is from Heather McPherson.
Sir, what do you believe about abortion, and what would you do about it as a U.S. Senator?
Well, thank you for the question. I am pro-life. The National Right to Life organization has endorsed me for the reason that they know that I will support the culture of life. I'd like to continue to appoint judges that don't create laws from the bench and try to legislate from where they are, but interpret the laws that are on the books. I'd love to see us incrementally continue to work as a country to do everything we can to lessen the number of abortions that take place in this country. That's what I'd like to do as it relates to life. I think that people know that about me. People all across the state, people that have worked for decades in places like crisis pregnancy centers, understand the tremendous difference that exists between myself and my opponent on this issue. I would like to go back again, though, Congressman, to the stay the course comment that you made. The fact of the matter is that there's different context upon which we talk about. If on one hand we're talking about the fact that we should just leave Iraq, and I know that there are people who talk about that, I have a hard time understanding what people who say we should just leave tomorrow or leave in a month, I have a hard time understanding what their vision of what Iraq would be like the very next day. So if it means that I think we should stay long enough for the people of Iraq to be able to secure themselves, that's one thing. But what I do believe, and what I've said all along, is that we need to do everything we can to give the military commanders on the ground and the democracy that's there the tools to make sure that they're able to move ahead, they're able to do those things to make sure that the country is secure. And we need to listen a whole lot less to people in Washington who are not there on the ground.
Mr. Ford, you have 1 minute.
Let me answer 2 things real quick. Number one, I'm going to let you reconcile the differences with your own statements, the same statement with yourself. It sounds a lot like John Kerry when he said he was for something, then he was against it. Stay the course is stay the course, Mayor Corker. And unfortunately, that's the policy that we've pursued now for 3 years, and it's not working. Even James Baker admits it's not working. I have one question on the immigration issue. If indeed you learn that the subcontractor had hired illegals on the work site, why didn't you just fire them? Why did you wait for the INS to come back 3 times before the problem was corrected? And answer the young lady, I'm pro-life too. I think we got to take steps early on, even before a woman gets pregnant, by ensuring that we put character education in our classes. I'm delighted that my colleague and friend Lincoln Davis is here, whose legislation to Congress I'm proud to support, which introduces abstinence programs into our schools and tries to do everything possible to reduce the number of abortions instead of talking and yelling and screaming about it.